Oh, it is so good to be back. It was good to go. Now we have walked where Jesus walked. We've seen the places.
Literally.
And I'm going to be able to give you a little more accurate descriptions on a lot of these places that we see here in our lessons. We're in Getting to Know Jesus, Volume 12, Lesson 149. That's on pages 38 to 51 in your books. And the Bible text is on pages 39 to 42. The lesson notes are on pages 43 through 49. And you know you can write notes in there. Those of you that don't have a book, it's a little hard to read the lesson in advance and kind of keep up with us, but we do have some books available if you still want one. Okay, well, Jesus is still on trial before Pilate. We started out there, and then we took a little interlude for him to go before Herod. Now he's back to Pilate. Tonight, we're going to talk about the coward, the corrupt, and the courageous. And I'm looking over this lesson, I'm preparing this PowerPoint, and I was like, boy, could I get off on some tangents on this. So you will probably find plenty of applications. I hope that you know which one you want to be you. We'll talk about that through the moment. Here is our timeline. We're right down at the bottom of the chart, and we're coming down the last day. This is Friday morning, about 6 a.m. It's getting up about sunrise here now. Herod was trying to find a reason to condemn Jesus. Jesus didn't give him any ammunition. So Jesus is back to Pilate, and the chief priests and the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all those that are opposed to Jesus are out there fussing about him and trying to get him stopped. So this is after sunrise, but before 9 a.m. in the morning. We're going to take our time going through Good Friday. This is Good Friday. This is where we are right now. We're going to be in Good Friday all the way down till lesson 154. Well, that'll give you a little bit of idea of where we'll be. And then, the great news! But we'll get there soon enough. Let's go on here. Let's talk about the coward, the corrupt, and the courageous. Through the ages, there have been tests for young men that were designed to help them transition from childhood into full-fledged adulthood. So what is the difference between men and the boys? Men and boys.
The price of their toys.
Well, the price of their toys. No, I don't think that's... Well, in some cases it may seem to be. But in our context, see, now this is a little sidebar here. Sometimes you have to define the word you're using so people will understand what you mean by that word. Because here, men and boys, what we think of men as grown-up guys and boys as younger men, they just haven't grown up yet, and the big difference is the price of their toys. And so we come up with all sorts of agendas. So let me define. Real men, in this context, are courageous, honest, hardworking. They're not afraid to stand for a right cause against all opposition. Now the boys that we're talking about in this comparison are cowards, or they're corrupt, and they'll try to justify their wrong behavior instead of repenting and doing what is right. Those who are not courageous men will lie, cheat, and steal to justify what they do. So that's the definition we're working with tonight. If you want to apply a different definition, you can do that, but you'll have to define it and use it in your context. We're in Matthew chapter 27, verses 15 through verse 23, Mark 15, verses 6 to 14, Luke 23, 13 to 22, and John 18, 39 to 19, verse 8. And you're noticing as we go through here how Luke will talk about one thing, and Matthew and Mark and Luke will talk about another thing, and John will talk about another thing. And by putting them all together, you get a clearer understanding of the timeline of the events, of what's going on or what isn't going on, than you would do if you just read one gospel. Not one gospel has all of these events in it. You've got to get them all together to get the fuller picture. So Jesus has been to Herod. He's been returned back to Pilate. Pilate tries to release him, but the crowd becomes a mob. Now, Pilate's weak attempt to compromise is met with growing hatred and threats against him. We'll see here in a little bit. The cowards are controlled by corrupt leaders. In the midst of this, our Lord is courageous and not detoured by their evil intentions. We're going to see the difference between men and boys in the definition that I gave you just a moment ago. So the first one is Pilate is a coward. Luke chapter 23. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people, and he said to them, "You brought me this man as one who has incited the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death." So the priest and the elders are before Pilate demanding that he crucify Jesus. They misrepresent the truth in order to manipulate Pilate into their own bidding. Now, I'm not going to name any specific incidences, but I'll bet we could divert off into a discussion right now of some people that are misrepresenting the truth. They are twisting it for their own agenda and not considering whether it's of God or not. This is what I want, good, bad, evil, or otherwise. And I'm going to lie, cheat, and steal, and do whatever I have to do to get you to support my agenda.
Sounds like a politician.
Every political commercial out there.
Our government.
There are too many, well, I wouldn't say all politicians do that, but there are too many who do. And when we have elections, they get to bad-mouthing one another instead of standing up for what they're going to stand up for, and it makes you wonder about all of them. And so, yeah, that's as far as I think about as far as we're going to go with that. But you can see, but how about those who are not politicians? How about maybe some of your neighbors? Or, if I may really get to meddling, have you ever been there? It doesn't matter what they're doing, it matters what you're doing. And our challenge here is to examine ourselves and see, am I walking right with Jesus? Or am I being like one of those people I don't want them to think I'm being like? So Pilate knows that Jesus is innocent and that they're doing this because they simply don't like him. But Pilate is a coward and is unwilling to take charge of the situation. Instead, he tries to pacify them by declaring that Herod found no fault in Jesus and he finds no fault in Jesus. Therefore, Jesus should not be executed. And by all law and right and legal procession or whatever, he's right. They had no right to justify executing or crucifying Jesus. But they are so evil in their intent, they are so set in their mind, look out and see what's going to happen. You already know because you've read past the end of the book. But we're going to take it here again and look at it in a little more detail. It's a sad commentary when a leader will compromise his position and established authority to allow a small group to impose their illegal or moral will on the government. And yet here we can again get back into a long discussion and a heated discussion and an angry discussion on people that are doing that very thing even here in our community and in our nation and in our state. If you're in a position of leadership, you are expected to lead. That means you take the lead. Leadership is to work within the goodwill of the people, but it is not to be manipulated and controlled by those who are seeking evil. This is why it is so important that we elect God-fearing people into political office here in the United States where we have the freedom to choose our leaders. And if we've got leadership we don't like, it's because enough people did not get out and vote on Christian, godly principles. And so we got what we deserve, whether we like it or not. And those of us who did vote, we need to just encourage more people to get out and vote in the next we got election coming up. Because we will choose, we do have the freedom to choose our government. And we choose godly leaders, we'll get godly government. We choose ungodly leaders, and we won't like it. Christy?
I am not very good at politics. I need a little guidance in deciding things like this. That's why I chose the wrong people, like I told you before.
Well, we'll hold you accountable for that.
The
The good news is that we do have people even in our church family, that pay a lot close attention to that. And there'll be people that you can talk to help you make wiser decisions and discuss things that if you have questions. We'll talk about that later. Pilate's integrity is being compromised, and he isn't leader enough to stop him. And this was one of the things. Pilate was not a tetrarch as Herod and there were three others. There were four of them leading. Three of them were called tetrarchs, which was the governor of a fourth. But Pilate was only called
A leader, huh?
huh?
He was a leader.
Governor. Yeah, he didn't get the same title as the others because he wasn't that strong of a leader to begin with.
Sure was.
And here he is. The heat is on. Jesus is being tried. Monkey trial, kangaroo court, unjustified, and Pilate doesn't have the courage to stop him.
You could.
To answer your question down here, if I was a leader, I would take all the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees and put them in jail and let Jesus.
I bet we all have a few thoughts of what we'd like to do to those ungodly people.
Easier
Well-
said than done.
So, what would you do if a group of religious leaders wanted you to violate, whoa, did you see that, Jack? If a group of religious leaders wanted you to violate God's word,
I won't do it.
you got to make a decision. Bob?
Some of those people are in very difficult situations. If you go back to the founding of our country, the founding fathers were pretty much unanimous about abolishing slavery. But they didn't abolish slavery because if they had, then the Union would have been divided.
That's right,
And so they looked at
in future times.
the
Some
future,
states did.
what would be the greater good, supposedly. With us looking back 200 years later, we're saying, well, they made the wrong decision. They should have stood up for their integrity. Well, and with Pilate, Pilate was looking at mass rioting, all kinds of chaos and all kinds of things, and he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Besides that, his wife was telling him, don't mess with this guy.
We're going to get there in just a minute.
When your wife starts getting involved, then you really got problems.
You really got a problem. There
I
is
say that because I'm not married.
My brother was a staunch Republican, right, and everything. Even when we were younger, we went out, in 1975, 76, and went out and worked for Reagan. Okay, then he went to college.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now he is the only Democrat in the family, including my aunts and uncles.
Well, that can change. Martha, you wanted to make a comment,
Yeah,
and
I
we
want
need
to
to go
make a
on.
comment about it. There were a couple states like Pennsylvania and Maryland who didn't have slaves in their country. California didn't either when it became a state. I've taken online classes on that. So,
You've done some research.
I've done some research on it. But I think it's called Liberty, the Liberty Story, and it's based on Christian values and how in the states, how all the preambles are based upon God. And our Constitution is just, if people wanted to abolish it, they need to abolish the whole thing. Because most of the leaders back then were ministers.
A lot of them were. We elected a lot of ministers in
That's
government
The black
in the
vote,
early
right?
of our history. Yeah, and fighting the Revolutionary War. Christy, we need to go on there.
I've noticed that Democratic, they will have programs to help the deaf, hard of hearing, or disabled people and all that. Do the Republicans do the same thing?
Yes, you cannot make partisan issues of some of these things because one will say one thing and another one will do another thing, but we've all got battles to fight there, and we can't narrow it down. As much as we sometimes would like to, we cannot narrow it down to partisan politics.
Nope.
No, I vote
It's
on the
broader
man.
than that,
I vote
and we
for
need
man.
to keep the broader picture in mind. So let's go on a little further here.
Whether the Democrats.
Now, Pilate is a coward, and what does the coward do? He tries to compromise. Matthew chapter 27, verses 15 to 19, Mark 15, verses 6 through 10, Luke 23, 16 and 17, and John 18, 39. So, here we go. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release to you a prisoner chosen by the crowd, whom the people requested, at the time of the Passover. So he says regarding Jesus, I will punish him and then release him. Now Matthew says at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Mark says he was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. This guy's a murderer. So when the crowd came up, they asked Pilate to do for him what he usually did. Hey, release somebody for us. And the crowd had gathered. Pilate asked him, which one do you want me to release? Do you want me to release to you Barabbas or Jesus, the King of the Jews, who is called the Christ? And so he knew that it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. Go on a little bit further here. When Pilate was sitting at the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message saying, don't have anything to do with this innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal in a dream because of him. What did you say about listening to your wife? So Pilate tries to compromise. Pilate, in an effort to appease the crowd, remember Pilate's a coward, he offers an annual release of someone who he has imprisoned. Now, in an effort to get them to accept the release of Jesus, he offers the choice between Jesus and Barabbas, a notorious criminal called Barabbas. Some scholars think his full name was Jesus Barabbas. Jesus Barabbas means Jesus, son of Abbas. Bar-Abbas means son of Abbas. So Jesus would have technically been named Jesus Bar-Joseph, Jesus, son of Joseph. I would be Glenn Bar-Oscar, Glenn, son of Oscar. That was my dad's name, in case you didn't already figure that out. Now, we don't know that that is a fact. That is an assumption. But you can imagine Jesus Barabbas is sitting back there. He's probably hearing some of this riot or near riot out there of this crowd. And wasn't as many people as you and I might be led to think if it happened in the Praetorium. If it happened on the temple grounds, they could get a bigger crowd. But in the Praetorium, there's not as much room. There weren't as many people there. But some people, regardless, Barabbas is in prison on death row for insurrection and murder. He's destined to be crucified. Pilate thinks the crowd will choose Jesus instead of Barabbas, and he will not have to do what he doesn't really want to do. So he tries to compromise.
That was the stupidest thing ever.
Well, now let's be careful here. Here's the kind of the, whoa, boy, this is the ridge, and I walk a thin line. Excuse me. Compromise can often achieve good results by finding a way to give what the other party is seeking without giving up what you are seeking is a great skill. And there are some people that are great at negotiating and drawing compromise and bringing a peaceful resolution to a situation. So there can be times when compromise is a good thing. It's not always necessarily bad. However, there are some people who refuse to compromise. So what do you got if you've got one person that's willing to compromise, but the other person that's adamant they are not going to compromise? And having been there and experiencing some of it firsthand, I will tell you, the Jews would be glad to compromise. But the Arabs do not want compromise. Arabs. The Muslims in Israel. They're more accurately, sometimes they get called Palestinians, but they're more accurately referred to as Arabs. And they don't want
There's no such
compromise.
thing as
And we could divide the whole lesson on that and we get too far off target. So we'll go on. If one party wants to get their way, the only compromise they will understand is for you to give in or fight. A bully understands a fist. He doesn't understand, let's sit down and talk this over. In those situations, direct leadership is necessary to protect the rights of everyone involved. Now, compromise is not good if it is coupled with cowardly actions or allows evil to prevail. So we have to be sometimes we have to look at times, but how can we negotiate our way through this situation? But there are some times when negotiation is not going to resolve anything except for causing you more penalty. And I'll give you an example. I heard another instance this week of a church where the pastors want to condone homosexual marriage. They want to compromise and give in to the pressure of those who are trying to say, you have to allow us our sexual immorality behavior, whether you want to or not, and you can't tell us that we're wrong. And some of you have already seen the headline. The mayor of Houston, Texas says, churches, you must submit your sermons to us for examination. And
Today it was on the news.
Houston,
Wow.
Texas, the mayor is a homosexual woman. She said that the churches have to submit their sermons for scrutiny,
Government.
if they speak out against homosexuals, there are going to be consequences. I guarantee you, she bit off an animal she ain't going
It
to
was on
want
the
to chew.
news today.
You haven't got any authority to do anything to them.
That's
That's right.
a blatant violation of the First Amendment.
Yeah.
No, they can't do it.
But yeah, it's going to draw
It's all
some
over
flack.
the news.
I'm sure
But
the
it's
preachers
just
are
what's
having a good
coming
time
for
with that
all Christians if we don't get some courage, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, and stand up for what we believe. But let's go on here. Religious leaders are corrupt. Matthew chapter 27 verses 20 through 23, Mark 15 verses 11 to 14a, and Luke 23 verses 18 to 20. Now I should say some religious leaders, not
That's
all
right, that's right.
religious leaders. And we do need to qualify some of these statements that we make. But let's read on here. But the chief priest and the elders persuaded the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas and instead to have Jesus executed. Which of the two do you want me to release for you? Asked the governor. With one voice they shouted back, no, not him, referring to Barabbas. Away with this man, referring to Jesus. Barabbas, release Barabbas to us. They answered. Barabbas had been thrown into prison because he'd taken part in a rebellion, an insurrection in the city, and was guilty of murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again. What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Christ, the King of the Jews? Pilate asked them, and they all answered, crucify him! Crucify him! They shouted. And for a third time he spoke to them. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. I have found no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and then release him. The priest, the chief priest and the elders and the religious leaders that are against Jesus, and as again, there are some that are not against Jesus. We'll talk about them when we get into the resurrection story. But there are some that are very much against him. And they should be most aware of the coming Messiah. They should be the ones studying the prophecies of the Old Testament and comparing to see if Jesus did indeed fulfill those prophecies. And if he might be who he claims to be. But no, they are so adamant against him, they will not consider that he could be who he claims to be. They are so corrupt in their quest for power and control over the Jews that they do not realize they are condemning the one they should be worshiping.
They're wasting their time today being at the label long when they should realize back then.
Hey, we were just over in Jerusalem last week. And the attitude of almost all of the Jews, they read the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They don't read much of any at all of the Old Testament. They absolutely will not touch the Psalms or the Proverbs or the Song of Solomon or the prophecies of Elijah and Isaiah and those others. They stay right down there in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Yeah, that's what I think too.
That's what makes them a religious people.
They are very strict at their religion. The Orthodox are really strict. There are a lot of Jews that are kind of, I'm Jewish, but I'm kind of religious, but I'm not Orthodox. And then there are some Jews that are Jews in name only, and they're just as wild as the non-Jews.
They have Reformed Jews, because my parents were married by a Reformed
Yeah.
rabbi. Reformed Jews condone homosexuality. They
Yeah.
accept anything.
Marty?
People have got to understand there's a difference between a religion and God's way of life for all mankind. Religion is governed by laws and strict things that they do. Christianity is governed by Jesus Christ our Lord, and the way of life in Christianity is not religion. It's the way of life that He's given to us.
Amen.
Christianity is not the kind of religion as you defined in your definition of religion. There are other definitions of religion that Christianity will fit into.
Yeah.
Religion in and of itself is not a bad word. It depends on how you define and apply the word, whether it's a bad word or not. So, Christianity is a religion, but it's a good religion, not a bad religion.
James said this is pure
Right.
and undefiled religion. So James
Yeah.
put his stamp of approval on religion if it's pure and undefiled. And
Yeah.
basically what true religion is meeting the needs of the widow and meeting the needs of the orphan, giving clothes to those who have no clothes, giving food to those who have no food. That's pure and undefiled religion in God's sight, is being generous and merciful and meeting the needs of those around you.
And that's not the religion that we're talking about here today.
Right.
No. The religion, I would, if I may I would define religion as loving God and loving people.
That's true
Very simple.
religion.
That's true religion.
Yes.
But we have sometimes applied it and gotten caught up in rules and regulations, and that is the kind of religion that the Pharisees are engaged in. That's the kind of religion that the Orthodox Jews are engaged in even today, and this is the kind of religion that Jesus is fighting here as he is on trial. They're so corrupt in their quest for power and control over the Jews, they do not recognize the coming, and they're condemning the one they should be worshiping. Now, it is a tragedy when people in power allow themselves to be corrupted. And again, we can get off on a sidebar and have a whole run of it, talking about people that we believe are being corrupted that are in power. You've heard the cliche, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's relatively true, but not absolutely true. We must constantly examine ourselves to see that we don't abuse the power that we have.
That's right.
It's not near as much my problem of what they're doing in Washington or Tallahassee or City Hall or county offices as it is what I'm doing in my life. Am I abusing power that God has allowed me to have? So we must focus on serving people with what we have empowered in the ways that we've been empowered to serve. And your way of serving people is different. Your way of serving people is different. You've got a way of serving people is different. Every one of us has those ways where we can serve others. And it's not your job to do my job or my job to do your job, but it's each of our job to function as a part of the body serving others. How many elders and leaders in churches who've been in position for many years are more concerned with protecting the status quo than they are about teaching, reaching out and fulfilling the Great Commission? Now, I can't speak to all elders, but there have been a couple of situations in my past where I have observed church leaders that were more concerned with protecting the status quo than they were with fulfilling the gospel, shepherding the flock, assisting the minister in the work that God has called and they had called him to do.
If we talked about this, we'd be here all night.
We'd be here all night, just along with this other stuff, and we're already pushing the envelope. So the sad part is that most of them don't know how much they are hindering the gospel and the Lord's work in their church. And so here again, my job is not to examine you. My job is to examine me and make sure I'm not hindering the work of God in this church. Well, let's talk about, here's a picture of the fortress. This is supposed to be the fortress of Antonio. You know what? This may be the interest of the, we were there, we were looking at it. I don't recall seeing, this is not my picture yet. This is Cheryl Eastman's picture. So I don't remember seeing this exactly, but the fortress of Antonio isn't that big. You couldn't get more than about 200, maybe 300 people crowded into that space where they yelled, "Crucify him." Jerusalem's got thousands, and maybe 100,000, maybe probably 1 million people there for the Passover, and only a few hundred could get in there to the praetorium to yell, crucify him, crucify him. So it's kind of a, when we start to look at this, get it in balance. Not all the Jews were out there calling, crucify him. A lot of the people a week ago were saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, as he rode that donkey down the hill of Olives, Mount of Olives, and into the city of Jerusalem. So here is a different crowd hollering a different thing.
I wouldn't say crucify him, I would say crown him.
Well, that's what we would say by the grace of God, but these people hadn't come to that conclusion yet. Well, here's our big takeaway tonight, okay? Jesus is courageous. John 19, verses 1 through 7. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. If you've seen the Passion of the Christ, you got a pretty good idea of what happened. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. That's the picture I need to stick in here for this lesson. We've got a picture of a thorn bush. They clothed him in a purple robe, and he went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews, Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. So we just had a man beaten that was innocent. Had him whipped with a cat of nine tails. I'm getting ahead of myself here. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Here is the man. Or, for that, King James says, Behold the man. As soon as the chief priests and the officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify! Crucify! Then Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jews insisted, We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. We've got more to say about that too, but we're going to stop right there for right now. Jesus is courageous. In a one last attempt to persuade the crowd to release Jesus, Pilate has him flogged. Now this is a beating with a cat of nine tails. A cat of nine tails had 9 little thongs, probably about this long. And at the end of each thong, they would tie a piece of glass or metal or pottery or something that had sharp edges. And as that comes down across your back, it lacerates, it cuts you. It's not like a whip with just a leather whip that would just leave a welt. It's going to tear the flesh.
That's right.
And they would give 39 lashes, 40 minus 1. And so Jesus, this is what's happening to him right now. Now, Jesus is in for a real beating. And to add to the humiliation and to flaunt his kingship in front of the Jews, they weave a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And again, they clothe Jesus in a purple robe, and they mock him as the King of the Jews. And after the flogging and increased humiliation, they bring Jesus out in hopes that his condition will shame the crowd into letting him go. Hasn't this man suffered enough now at your hatred and your anger and your mob rule? Let him go. Now Jesus could have stopped this procedure any time. It took courage to take what he took. He could have stopped it any time. He had plenty of ability to defend himself successfully against the crowd. He could have just spoken a few words and Pilate would have said, Excuse me, you can go. Please, you can go. Pilate would have bowed down and worshipped him.
Just think though, what would have happened if he hadn't went?
If Jesus had not died on the cross, you and I would still be in our sins, and this would be totally a waste of time. We would all be subject to the devil.
He knew he was going to go.
Jesus knew that he had to do this, and it took courage. That courage started started way long before when he started his ministry, but we saw a tremendous example of that courage in the garden. Father, not my will, but your will. That took courage. to face adversity, to face a trial that's going to cost you your life, yeah, that takes real courage. Jesus had that courage.
What does he mean by when he was at the Garden of Gethsemane and he was praying, take my cup, but to be, what was all that?
He said, I don't want to die. You want to die? I don't want to die, God. But if I must, I will. That's bottom line what it amounts to. And here he is, being beaten, and that hurt. And he's saying, Father, I've got to go through this to be obedient. We talk about obedience. We've talked about that lots of the Getting to Know Jesus Bible Study series. That's a big word for us, and one we will work on every day for the rest of our lives. But I hope when you're feeling challenged, you'll remember how obedient Jesus was. See, Jesus knows this is within his Father's will, and he is courageous enough to endure the humiliation, just the name-calling and the mockery. He's courageous enough to endure the pain and the shame and the rejection of this public abuse of his rights as a free and innocent man.
He sees what they do.
Sometimes it takes more courage to remain silent than to speak out against an injustice. Sometimes. Each situation is different, and you have to determine what is in the best interest of you and whomever may be concerned. I'd like to spend more time there, but we spent more than enough time already, so we're going to go on. The conclusion is this: don't be like Pilate. Don't be like a priest that is given into corruption, or a politician. Be a leader. The one thing I would love to see out of this church is that everybody that comes through that door goes out that door more determined to be a leader for Jesus Christ in the ways that you can.
That's right.
With the people that you can influence. If you go out of here being a leader, you will impact the community. And this little church can be a life-saving station to a lot of lost and hungry souls. But if we go out that door and we aren't leaders, we're just a bunch of wimps, we're just a bunch of cowards. Stand up for Jesus and don't cower or compromise. Next week, Jesus will be humiliated even more as he marches to Calvary. Why is he doing this?
Because he loves us.
We're going to turn over to page 50 in our book for our discussion. You can follow us and stay in touch with what is happening with the Getting to Know Jesus Bible Study Ministry on Plaxo, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and watch our video clips on YouTube and GodTube. Getting to Know Jesus is sponsored by New Hope Gospel Ministries. If you'd like to follow along with us and start your Getting to Know Jesus Bible Study group, or just pray for us or support our ministry, you can go to www.gettingtoknowjesus.org and find all the information that we have available for you. If you look at the lower right-hand corner, there's a button where you can make a safe and secure donation to the Getting to Know Jesus Bible Study Ministry. Or you can go to the order page and order your Getting to Know Jesus books for your Bible study group. Thank you for stopping by, and keep us in your prayers and let us know how we can pray for you.